How's it going, everyone? My name is Michael SK, and welcome back to Higurashi When They Cry Chapter 7. This is Rika's final day, or her scheduled final day, and there's been quite a bit of evidence that has come up in the story here that really does lead to the mountain dogs setting their sights to actually kill Rika. So I was right on that prediction. It makes the most sense that the antagonist group that has been revealed to us, along with Takano, is also the group that is trying to kill her, for whatever reason. Not really sure why that has to play out first before the next stage of their doomsday plan is set in motion. I'm sure we'll figure that all out very soon. Rika is taking precautions to better protect herself, so she's not fully trusting the mountain dogs, with the possibility that Takano could still be alive. It's crazy that she's even considering that possibility, but the fact that she is allowing her to take the necessary steps to protect herself by bringing in the police to protect her as well, alongside the mountain dogs, who are quote-unquote protecting her. We'll see how this all plays out, because there's like 20 mountain dogs and only 4 police. I'm sure that there's going to be something that comes up.
いますのですよ。どう思う？今回。確かに、僕もこういう展開はあまり見た記憶がありませんのです。今回はひょっとしてって思うことはやっぱり罪なのかしらね。僕は期待も失望もしませんです。ただ、あるがままに訪れる結果を眺めるのみです。
Hanyu is still acting like a bystander. I was going to say babysitter. That is not at all what that word was. I knew she was going to say something like that, but part of me was hoping she would say something more positive. Upon hearing her say what she did, I felt a little disappointed, and wondered why Hanyu refused to be anything but an onlooker. I always thought it was normal for her to be that way because she's a special existence. I also convinced myself I had to be an onlooker too, since I was a similar being. However, I can't just let go of everything and become a bystander. I can't become like her. I can't stop hoping for a better life for Rika Furude. That hope was betrayed so many times, and my heart was crushed countless more. And that's why I stopped expecting anything to turn out the way I wanted. So is Hanyu the same way?
羽生も傷つくのが嫌で期待することをやめた。
I've only lived for 100 years, but I know how frightening it is to have high expectations. Hanyu should also be aware of that, since she's lived far longer than me. I always thought that Hanyu was a special existence, but except for the fact that she's invisible, everything about us is the same. She has the same thoughts and feelings as everyone else, yet I still saw her as a special existence. And that's why I just assumed that her mind worked in a different way.
僕は理科に比べて長くを生きすぎましたのです。喜びより悲しみが後に残り、期待すれば裏切られる方が多いことを知りすぎてしまいました。だからもう何が起こっても心を傷つけたいと思わないのです。だから今回の世界でも期待しないのね。私がひょっとするとこの運命から逃れられるかもしれないという期待を。羽生は私がどうせまた失意のうちに殺されると思ってる。そんなことは思ってないのです。
Hanyu looked uncomfortable. She had no doubts that I'd be killed again that night. And that's what it means to not have hope. But she just can't own up to it because she doesn't want to hurt my feelings.
羽生も聡子と同じなのね。何かの幸運か、誰かが助けて奇跡を起こしてくれるまで戦うことを恐れているだけよ。それを強さだと勘違いしている。つい最近までは私もそうだったけどね。
Hanyu looked down and bit her lip. She couldn't deny what I said.
あんたも何度も聞いてるはず。奇跡ってのは
みんなで団結しないと起こせない。団結というのは、つまり信じること。みんなで信じないと奇跡は起こせないのよ。
What I just said sounded as though I was blaming her for the miracle not happening. Maybe I was too harsh to her. I stayed quiet and Hanyu continued to look at the floor shaking. And then she looked up at me and spoke. I noticed sadness, but also a little bit of anger in her eyes.
触れることもできず、話すこともできない。見ているしかできない僕も、そのみんなに含まれるのですか？理科に、どんな顛末も見ていることしか許されなかった僕の気持ちがわかるというのですか？
There was a slight severity in the tail end of Hanyu's speech. Except for me, she can't communicate with anyone in this world. She hates to be reminded of that.
ごめん。やめましょう。この流れは喧嘩になるわね。自分が殺されるまでの貴重な時間を。あんたと喧嘩して過ごしたいとは思わないわ。
僕も、リカと喧嘩をしたくはないのです。
でも、これだけは言わせて。私とあなたは。だから、友人の人生が、乗るか反るかという時に、期待しないとか、あるがままを受け入れるとか、言って
そのことは謝りますのです。でも、期待するかしないかは、僕の心の中で、好きにさせてくださいなのです。
She can be very stubborn sometimes. Hanyu seems weak on the outside, but she actually has a very strong moral code, one that she wouldn't bend for anything. She apologized to me, but she wasn't being honest. She still wasn't expecting anything good to come from this world. She still thinks that I'm going to die pitifully, and that's why she refuses to believe in miracles. I've been living with her long enough to read her mind. I feel bad for her, in a sense. She's been living too long and lost all of her hope. Hanyu told me to call her if anything else happened, and soon disappeared. I'm sure she's still around. She's probably still watching me as if she's watching a TV show. The time of my death is slowly approaching. Will I be able to survive this time? It's been a long time since I faced this fear without drinking wine. Alcohol does help. But what would I know? I don't drink that. Or do I? I don't know. Well, whatever takes the edge off, I guess. We got a tip? Nope. I was left with nothing else to do after washing the dishes and cleaning the room. The mountain dogs and police were protecting me. Just in case, I figured I should leave something behind for Sotoko. Should I write down some recipes for her in the notebook? Will she be happy if I leave a will for her? I laughed at my own foolishness. No one would be happy to read a will. If I die, they'll be devastated and wonder why I didn't talk to them. And that's exactly how I felt when Sotoko didn't ask for any help when her uncle was abusing her. I wonder, will I be killed before Sotoko even comes home? My memories of these days are never very clear. The day I die is always vague in my recollections. It's fine if I'm murdered before Sotoko gets home, but if I'm murdered after, then would they kill her along with me? I don't want that to happen. It's bad enough it's bad enough already that I end up killed, excuse me. If Sotoko's murdered along with me each time, that would be too much to bear. Just how much have I ignored other people's sadness with that rash idea that the world ends when I die? Thinking about that made me feel truly ashamed of myself. I turned on the TV to try and reduce the silence, but it didn't help at all. Worse, not only did the TV not help with my fears, it felt like it symbolized Hanyu and my allies, making me feel even more unpleasant. It was past lunchtime, nearly 3 p.m. School should be out soon. I'm not there today, so they probably won't do a club activity. Sotoko should be home shortly. It seems I'm going to survive until she gets home after all. If she comes home and asks me what's troubling me, I might end up telling her the truth. If I talk to someone, that person will be demoned away by the mountain dogs. That's why I've never spoken to anyone about it. I didn't want my friends to get into danger. But If Sudoko was also murdered likewise in every world because she was involved with me, then we're doomed to share the same fate. It's better to know the truth than to be killed without knowing what's going on. But I'm under very strict security right now. I might be able to survive in this world. If that's the case, I shouldn't talk to Sudoko about it. It won't be so easy to talk to my friends after all. Moments later, I heard a surprised yell of Sudoko's coming from downstairs. She'd returned. It sounded like she was scared to see a stranger in our home. I'd have to tell her that the police were here. That would be very tantamount to telling her that someone is out to kill me. I don't know how to explain it to her, or how much I should tell her. However, my thoughts were soon interrupted by the noise of a crowd. Sudoko hadn't come home alone.
ただいまでございますのよ。それよりリカ、下のおまわりさんは何なんですの？
Oh, yep, the squad is here.
なんてどういうわけよ。あんた一体何をしでかしたの？
みーちゃん聞くこと違う。一体何があったのリカちゃん。
境内の中にも見慣れない人がいました。あれも私服警官ですか？ただごとじゃないんですけど。
俺たちリカちゃんが何を悩んでるのか知らないが、みんなで励まそうって思ってきたんだ。でもどうやらそんな悠長な事態じゃねえようだな。
I couldn't stop laughing upon seeing everyone rush into my house all asking the same questions. It made me feel as though being depressed all day had just been a waste of time.
リカ、笑ってる場合じゃありませんでしたよ。どういうことなのか説明してくださいまし。どうもこうもないのです。今日は僕が殺される日なのです。はぁ？
Everyone already knew that I'd been telling people about how I was going to be killed, but they were surprised to hear it from my own mouth.
なあリカちゃん、俺は確かに昨日リカちゃんから聞いた。自分は誰かに殺されるみたいな話をな。でもそれはリカちゃんの冗談みたいなもんだと思ってた。だがな、もうごまかすのはなしだぜ。話してもらうぜ。
Keiichi spoke with a harsh tone, as though I'd made him upset. As my friend, he must think that it's unforgivable that I didn't talk to him about it. He wasn't the only one feeling that way, though. Every single one of them was looking at me with worried expressions on their faces. Like, I get, you know, you should talk to your friends. I mean, that was the huge point of Chapter 6, right? And it really showed to have such an effect, and it would have had such a good effect on all the previous chapters, and we've seen that here. But how do you explain this, you know?
だから私もみんなのために何かの助けをしたいんですのよ。気持ちだけで嬉しいのです。リカが自分で私に言いましたのよ。戦う勇気を持てと。あなたは自分でそう私に言っておきながら実践していないではございませんの。
Sorry, I was getting a drink. Sodoko pointed out something that I've already realized. I had no way to argue back.
リカちゃんは話せば巻き込まれるって言ったんだよね。リカちゃんが話さなくても私たちは巻き込まれる気でいるんだよ。
そうさ、俺たちは仲間で部活のメンバーなんだよ。リカちゃんの危機はメンバー全体の危機さ。かつて聡子が危機だった時もメンバー全体の危機として戦った。それと同じだよ。
命を狙われるとか物騒な話になればますます園崎家の出番だと思いますけれど、それこそ物騒な話に及ぶなら警察より頼もしいですよ。ねえおね。そうだよ、こういうことこそ相談してほしいね。何をトラブったの？リカちゃんを殺すって脅迫するなんてとんでもない野郎だよ。
まあリカちゃんの口の重さを見る限り心当たりがないのか薄いのかのどちらかだな。相手が分かってりゃ楽な話なんだからな。
みんなは鋭いので、僕が何も話さなくても勝手に話が進んでしまうのです。リカ、はぐらかさないでほしいですわよ。ちゃんとお話しなさいませ。一体何があったんですの？これはどういうことなんですの？ 警察が来るなんてよっぽどのことですのよ。警察には話せて、どうして私たちには話してくれませんの？私たちには話しにくい理由なの？リカに話しにくいようなやましい理由なんてあるわけありませんでしたよ。
落ち着け、サトコ。リカちゃんはこう見えても御三家の当主なんだぞ。お社様の生まれ変わりなんて呼ばれて、年寄り連中に盲信されてるんだ。俺たちの想像のつかないところで何か厄介なことに巻き込まれていたということもあるかもしれない。そういうゴタゴタをこれからこの村で楽しく過ごしていこうっていう俺たちに話したくなかったとか、そういうのじゃないのか？
村とリカちゃまに関わるヤバい話ですか。となるとお社様を盲信する年寄り連中の絡みとしか思えません。ってことは時期的に考えてお社様のたたり関係か。あれだ、富武さんと高野さんが殺された件絡みじゃないかな。
どうして富武さんたちが殺された事件がリカちゃんに関連して、リカちゃんが命を狙われなくちゃならないの？話が突飛すぎるよ。
命が狙われてるって時点で十分話がぶっ飛んでる。俺たちが普段知る以上のしがらみがリカちゃんにあって、それを話せないってことなんだろうな。ビンゴだろ。あまり楽しい話じゃないから、むしろ仲間には話せないってんだろ。
信じられないですわ。本当なんですの、リカ。何か村とか富武さんたちの事件とかそういうのが関係していますの？
I remained silent, but with my mouth open. I hadn't answered any of their questions, but they continued to ask, and it eventually hit the nail on the head. It was more surprising than anything. But then again, these are, after all, my beloved clubmates. I laughed once more. My issues and my secrets are so devastating to me, but they stopped sounding like such a big deal when everyone talked about them together. They knew exactly what was going on without me saying a word. In that moment, I realized just how powerless I am. I had to tip my hat to them. Everything seems so foolish now, and so I decided to just tell them everything.
話せと言うなら話しますです。でもどうせ信じられませんのです。
信じるさ。リカちゃんが真実を語る限り、俺たちは疑わない。
Everyone's expressions turned grave as they vowed not to make light of anything I told them. And so, I'm going to tell them everything. I want to see if they really will believe me or not.
なら話します。多分私は富武と高野を殺した犯人に狙われています。
ってことはそれって連続開始事件の真犯人ってこと？
それはわかりません。ですがその可能性もあります。意味がわかりづらいですわね。どうして富武さんや高野さんを殺した人がさらにリカも殺さないといけませんの？
Ueshi thinks Takano is the culprit. Okanogi thinks that Irie is the culprit. Either way, it sounds like someone from Tokyo is trying to kill me. I can't tell if it's Takano or Irie, but I do know that to them, I'm like a trump card. In order to explain everything, I'd need to talk to them about the relationship between Hinamizawa, Tokyo, and the Irie clinic. I don't think they'll believe me. It's such a ridiculous story. But who would ever believe it, if not my friends?
話せばみんな巻き込まれますです。いいのですか？
いいに決まってるぜ。リカちゃんが巻き込まれた時点で、すでに俺たちも巻き込まれているんだからな。
Everyone nodded at Keiichi's words.
では話しますです。
I'm going to see how everyone reacts. I'm going to ascertain what friendship is all about. With a nod of my own, I opened my mouth and began to explain.
ひなみざわにはある特別な病気があるのです。その病気の名前は仮なのか正式なのかわかりませんですが、ひなみざわ症候群と呼ばれていますです。
Everyone glanced back and forth at each other when I mentioned the term. They'd never heard it before. The name Hinamizawa Syndrome has actually been around since before the war. It's the general term for the severe homesickness and mental instability that people from Hinamizawa experience when outside of the village. People in Hinamizawa have refused to leave the village since the era of Onigafuchi. The villagers believed that they'd been cursed by Oyashiro-sama if they left, and people who did often came back because of that curse. And people who did often came back because of that curse. That is a weird way to... Okay, whatever. In general, it used to be thought of as only severe homesickness. But during the war, soldiers from Hinamizawa became mentally deranged in faraway places. That does sometimes happen in war. What was unique about the soldiers from Hinamizawa was the way that they killed their own comrades and committed suicide at the end. One doctor became curious about these cases and studied those soldiers. That's when they found out that it was actually a disease only found in Hinamizawa. God, fuck. Jesus Christ. Excuse me. According to this doctor, their strange behavior was not the result of their culture. It was a mental disease triggered by external circumstances. A mental disease with an external cause is different from a psychological illness. It's the result of some kind of physical disorder, and it causes people to become mentally unstable when something triggers it. There are 3 categories of externally caused mental diseases: traumatically induced, substance abuse induced, and chemical imbalance induced. Traumatically induced disorders are cases resulting from damage to the brain from trauma or infection that influences the mind. This is the reason personalities can change as a result of head injuries. Substance abuse, as the name suggests, refers to cases where drugs, especially alcohol or stimulants, have influenced the mind. The last category is chemical imbalances. These are cases where some ailment in the patient's body causes abnormal secretions of bodily chemicals, which then influence the brain's functions. This may sound odd, but it's been said that people tend to become depressed when they have a cold. We've all experienced the ways in which physical sickness can cause a buildup of negative emotions. However, with chemical imbalances, the cause is more direct. People's emotions aren't born from our hearts. Everyone should know logically that they're the result of chemicals secreted by the organs in our body as necessary. God, fuck. Sorry, guys. So when the organs operating the secretion of those emotional controllers malfunction, it causes them to secrete abnormal amounts. The thyroid gland, for example, secretes hormones that regulate emotions. When that gland is defective, the balance of those hormones becomes unstable. This can cause people to have not only a physical sickness, but also a mental sickness such as depression. People don't get mentally ill just because of mental problems. Human beings are made out of meat. We get mentally ill when that meat is defective. I guess that's a simple way to put it, huh? The doctors studying Hinamizawa Syndrome also came up with a theory. He suggested that there is a pathogen endemic to Hinamizawa that, if its hosts stray too far from home, affects the chemicals in their brain and causes them to hallucinate. The villagers' belief in Oyashiro-sama is certainly related to this endemic disease. People in Onigafuchi village knew about this syndrome. They knew that they couldn't survive outside the village. They also didn't want anyone else to enter the village because they would get infected too. They took this disease as a curse, not a sickness. The most significant symptoms of this disease are antisocial behavior and an extreme persecution complex. The eventual suicide, caused by defects in the lymph nodes, are also another unique characteristic. The unusual behavior of terminal patients is what inspired the legend of the demons coming out of the swamp and attacking the villagers. Basically, the sick villagers developed severe persecution complexes and wound up killing other villagers. After a long time, survivors of the disease started to comprehend its rules. They discovered that the disease is incurable once you contract it. And that's why they started barring outsiders from entering the village. Also, once you become ill, you will begin developing a persecution complex. This can happen to anyone in the village. The doctrine of Oyashiro-sama says that the blood of humans and demons was mixed together, and that Oyashiro-sama has control over the violent blood of the demons. People said that you'd be cursed if you didn't follow Oyashiro-sama's rules. And that could also be understood to mean that as long as you followed Oyashiro-sama's rules, you could cope with this endemic disease. This is what was meant by the scripture in Oyashiro-sama's legend that said they appeared, unified the humans and demons, and made them live together in this village. Then there was the most important part, the rules to prevent symptoms from appearing. Those rules are the taboos, and people were strictly taught that Oyashiro-sama would curse them if they broke those rules. The horrible, bloody traditions of the village were probably performed in order to force people to respect these taboos. There are several ways to keep the disease under control, but there are two main conditions for doing so. The first one is to prevent suspicion. When the villagers are suspicious of someone, it can trigger their persecution complex, which can lead to them developing terminal symptoms. Ah, okay. Well, that suddenly kind of opens some doors with some of the previous chapters, doesn't it? That's why they made sure to have such a tightly knit community, so that people wouldn't suspect each other. Since the terror of Oyashiro-sama's curse is emphasized, many don't know this, but she's also a god of marriage and neighborly love. However, this condition is not as important as the other one. Indeed, Oyashiro-sama isn't even recognized as a god of friendship in Hinamizawa anymore, and is only worshipped as such in Okinomiya's Hirasaka district. Now, for the other condition. This one is much clearer, and was practiced more strictly. If villagers leave Hinamizawa, they will fall ill quickly, proportional to the distance from the village. Villagers nowadays will not get sick as rapidly, even if they leave town or even go out of the country for a long time. However long ago, they would fall ill as soon as they left the village. It's very unfortunate that Keiichi got infected so soon after he moved to the village. It was also very unfortunate that he got sick just because he left the village for a few days to go to his relative's funeral in that one world. And that's why Hanyu felt so bad for him that time and kept on apologizing over and over. Although no matter how much she apologized, he never heard her voice. This turned into a long discussion, but these rules etched around Oyashiro-sama's curse represent the ancient wisdom of how to cope with the Hinamizawa Syndrome. Is there any way to use this mental disease for military purposes? The aforementioned doctor insisted there was, but the military didn't listen to him at all at the time. They were interested in developing a weapon that could make a dramatic change to the war efforts. They didn't have any money to spare for the research of this strange disease. In this way, research on Hinamizawa Syndrome was abandoned. Then the war ended. Japan started its reconstruction under American leadership. However, some powerful people in the political world didn't want to accept the American way of thinking. Some of them were fired by the GHQ, but they still stayed on as advisors to the government, since Japan has a culture of respecting the elderly. Eventually, a political organization was formed, the object of which was to restore Japan to the way it was before the war. In the beginning, this organization was a very small group. It was just a gathering of 2 or 3 individuals who shared the same ideals, blowing hot air at an instrument. Those 2 or 3 hit it off with each other and grew to the size of a class reunion. That group became a rather sizable organization, eventually becoming a political one. Well, it would be more accurate to call them a secret society. This secret society eventually came to be called by the name of the place where it was based, Tokyo. There are many mysteries about Tokyo. One thing I knew for sure is that it was composed of old men from Japan's political stage, ones with strong power to indirectly influence the government and vast assets that meant they could work from the shadows. They were also connected to various corporations, and their goal was to return Japan to the way it was before the war. Of course, that was a pretty ridiculous goal. It was nothing more than an idea in their minds immediately after the war, back when they were still bowing their heads to the occupation forces of those white barbarians. Once Japan's post-war reconstruction began, Tokyo steadily became a shell of its former self. But it didn't totally become a shell, it culled the fat. Japan regained its peace, and years passed. However, some people still continue to believe that Japan had been better before the war, and they were determined to return the country to those times. So this Tokyo plotted how to restore pre-war Japan from many angles. They approached the problem economically, internationally, and militarily as well. Japan has no nuclear armaments due to the 3 non-nuclear principles. In other words, this country has to brown-nose America as long as they hold nuclear weapons. The number one priority of Tokyo is to be independent from America. They want this country to be on equal footing, and to obtain a weapon of mass destruction that isn't nuclear in nature. That was the reason why they started thinking about utilizing Hinamizawa Syndrome. However, they couldn't study this disease openly. In order to utilize it for military purposes, they had to hide the existence of the disease itself. So they enlisted one young researcher, Kyosuke Irie. I think I butchered his name. I need to make it clear that Irie isn't some far-right supporter of the secret society. He's just a young, capable doctor and an earnest researcher. He published an innovative thesis, but other academics thought he was too radical. However, that convinced Tokyo that he was the only researcher suitable to study Hinamizawa Syndrome. As someone young and ambitious, Irie was thrilled to take on the project of studying this rare disease with a large budget, a large staff, and his own facility. But researching the disease would mean that he'd end up infected too. No one would want to take on such dangerous research. He really was too young. With his other option being wearing down his youth working hard at the night shift for a local practice, he wanted to answer the expectations of the sponsor who carefully selected him. In the end, Irie was able to uncover that, as hypothesized, the Hinamizawa Syndrome was a unique infectious disease, and he developed both a treatment and a vaccine. Irie was extremely talented. The Irie Institute was formed to study the disease. Irie was nominally the head of the organization, but Tokyo still sent out a supervisor because when all was said and done, he was just a researcher. That supervisor was Mio Takano. Takano's job at the Institute was to act as a go-between for Tokyo and Irie, and manage the research progress and preserve its secrecy. The latter was the most important part of her job. She had to do her best to prevent people from finding out that Irie was researching the disease, or even that the disease exists at all. The Mountain Dogs were formed for that purpose. They were under Takano's command, and their job is to prevent the Institute's secrets from being discovered. The Mountain Dogs are one special forces unit specializing in unconventional warfare and owned by Tokyo with its vast influence on the SDF. Tokyo had set their eyes on the likelihood that a small elite squad of covert operatives would be a trump card in the anti-nuke era, so they vigorously investigated those options. This was a worldwide trend. Since the Cold War, everyone avoided sending troops directly to their enemy's doorstep. Japan was also trying to be part of that world. As a result, by 1983, even the police had been forming secret special force units. Prefectural Police Squad 2, the one who intervened when Rena laid siege to her school, changed their name to Zero Company and grew into an anti-terrorism squad that handled hijackings around the Kansai airport area. The National Police Agency's Squad 6 was formed as a counterterrorism squad for Narita Airport 2, and they later changed their name to 7th Company as well. They theorized that in a world where nations possess nukes they can't see, or use small elite special forces disrupting metropolitan areas would be the new way of waging war. So in 1977, they developed the SAT's predecessor, fuck the SATs, the special, I had to throw that one in, the Special Task Force SAP, to serve as the National Police Agency's trump card in securing the peace. Likewise, the Japan Coast Guard established their Special Task Force, the SST, in anticipation of unconventional warfare on the coast. There are several known Special Forces units in Japan. When they hear a phrase like Special Forces, most people tend to think of a movie or a comic book. However, these units actually exist, and are protecting Japan in secret. During the famous incident of suspicious boats off the coast of Noto Peninsula, the news reported that the helicopter squad trained in gun battles was headed there, but was recalled because the suspicious boats sank. But that was because the Coast Guard's SST acted. However, the news never mentions the SST or any other Special Forces unit. All of these units were established after Tokyo made a suggestion about it to the government. Researching military tactics under the name of peace and order worked perfectly for Tokyo. But since the mid-century anti-war movement made people resent those forces, these special units have been kept secret as of 1983. Furthermore, these units are not all formed under the jurisdiction of the police. There are still many other military units that are kept in secret from the average citizen. The Mountain Dogs are actually one of those special units. They specialize in kidnapping, espionage, and preserving secrecy. You might as well call them an assassination unit. They were around during the dam conflict as well. Tokyo worked to put an end to the dam project because of the impact it would have on Idie's research. The Mountain Dogs were the ones who kidnapped the Minister of Construction's grandson. Most people believe that the Sonozaki family was at the center of the movement, but in reality, the Mountain Dogs were responsible for many of the things the Sonozakis were accused of. In that sense, the existence of the Sonozaki family was an advantage to the dogs. Yeah, that was brought up with me a few times, that the, Idie being so easily called by the people that kidnapped the grandson. It is kind of weird how that all went down. One may think, and one being me, that, oh, that's just the only doctor available in the area. But come on, like that whole deal was suspicious. And I'm sure Idie was out of the loop, sure, but it was also the Mountain Dogs. So of course they're going to have his contact. It was all very connected. It was quite literally in our face. Their main job after the dam conflict ended has been to continue keeping the disease hidden from the public. With the spread of information networks in the modern age, the media jumped onto any unusual incident and quickly aired it to the whole nation. Tokyo doesn't want the disease to be known nationwide, since they're trying to utilize it for their own purposes. The main task of the Mountain Dogs is to kidnap people suffering from Hinamizawa Syndrome. They pose as gardeners, but in actuality they patrol the village to make sure nothing strange happens. You know what? I was thinking about that. I thought that's how it was. I mean, they kind of outed themselves in the last episode when they called themselves the gardeners, but I mean, the white van that would follow Keiichi around in Chapter 1. In Chapter 6, the gardeners showed up. I mean, come on. To a normal person, they're not going to seem suspicious. They're posing as gardeners, so any normal person will see them as gardeners. But Rena didn't. Keiichi in Chapter 1 didn't. It's all coming together here. They're the ones who demon away people who go missing. They're probably also involved in some of the mysterious deaths too. The last important person is Jiro Tomotake. Okay, let's back up a moment. So Satoshi is dead, for sure. He killed somebody. He most likely was at the highest or second highest level of the syndrome. There was no going back for him, so they had to get rid of him. They just had to. Wow. Just kind of thinking of it like that. The Sonozakis had nothing to do with him. That is so unfortunate that Shion was just way off the mark in Chapter 5. I don't know his real name. He was an auditor who was sent from Tokyo 4 times a year. He came to check on the progress of the research and outline requests, from Tokyo. Excuse me again, goddamn. He discussed the research budget with EDA too. He also got the observation report on EDA from Takano. That was his purpose. EDA started out by studying the autopsy results of dead villagers, and he discovered many answers from that. In 1979, the Mountain Dogs kidnapped the culprit behind the murder of the construction chief, who was the terminal patient of Hinamizawa Syndrome. The nature of the disease was dramatically clarified. Their research made rapid progress after that, and they discovered a vaccine, medication, and other methods of treatment for the disease. At the same time, they continued to investigate how to utilize it for military purposes. One of the interesting findings of the research was that the pathogen can only be found when the patient is still alive. On top of that, they couldn't detect the presence of the pathogen at all unless they used a certain inhumane method. In other words, it's virtually impossible to detect the pathogen by normal means. It left almost no trace, and the unusual symptoms it produced seemed like voluntary behavior, so they concluded that the disease could be used to their advantage, which explains why, throughout this entire time, in autopsies and everything with Tomitake, that they were unable to find anything that looked like a drug had been consumed or something like that made him lose his goddamn mind. However, Tokyo has been going through some changes. It's been almost 50 years since the war ended. The leaders and shadows behind Japan's government who ruled from the center of Tokyo began growing infirm and opening up seats, steadily passing their leadership to the new generation. The whole organization has started to shift. Of course, the purpose of Tokyo has stayed the same. It's still a secret society of ultra-nationalists who want Japan to be at the top of the world. However, their ambition to start a war with America and take over the world has diminished. Tokyo has directed its priorities towards the economy, international affairs, and education. That doesn't mean that those ambitions are gone entirely, however. Several seniors still alive retain those ambitions. Tokyo continues to finance military research. But for the present-day Tokyo, EDA's research is actually something of an embarrassment. The new Tokyo is no longer interested in this project, and they announced that they're going to cut their budget as soon as those seniors pass away. However, EDA objected to that plan. He strongly appealed to the continuation of his research, and this is what Okunogi was talking about. EDA is in disagreement with Tokyo. EDA's research has been making great progress. They've discovered various treatment and testing methods, and he's even starting to develop a treatment plan for the whole village. If they cut his funding, EDA's research would end without any results. Tokyo had a discussion with EDA through Tomitake, and they decided to shut down his research partially but not fully. However, they told him to immediately stop researching military applications of the disease and destroy all the research data related to that. He had little interest in weaponizing the disease anyway, so EDA accepted those terms right away. Tokyo probably believed that it was better to let him find a cure for the disease than to terminate the project entirely. Honestly, it's a win-win. At this point, EDA considers himself one of the villagers. Perhaps exterminating the disease, infecting the villagers without their knowledge, is his way of atoning for using the village to advance his research and reputation. Both Tokyo and EDA agreed to fully terminate his research as soon as he discovered a way to completely eradicate Hinamizawa Syndrome. EDA made a plan for the next 3 years, and he promised them that he would find a resolution by 1986 at the latest. The meeting they had this June was to discuss the plan and budget for the next 3 years. Which brings us back to the beginning. One theory goes that Irie is in opposition with Tokyo, and as his trump card, he's planning to kill Rika Furude. The other theory is that Takano killed Tomitake, and as her trump card, she's going to kill Rika Furude. And that's it. That second one's the one, obviously. I suppose I need to explain why Rika Furude can be a trump card. The answer to that lies in the ancient traditions of Hinamizawa. God damn it, I don't know if I want to record anymore. This has been a long-ass episode. I've recorded more than I wanted to for tonight. So we're actually going to end it here, and we will just pick right up where we left off. That's the term. And we'll go along with it. Yeah, sorry, I am just out of it. God damn. It's been really hard for me to speak recently, it seems. I don't know what's wrong with me. Or maybe I just can't read. Maybe it's just all a realization coming at me at once. But no, this is very interesting because we've heard the terminology of Tokyo, and I'm gonna be real with you guys, this entire time, I thought they were meaning the fucking location. Like, okay, officials from Tokyo. I thought that's what it meant. The location Tokyo, not a group called Tokyo. Talk about misleading. That really threw me off. So it kind of changes things a little bit. It does become a little bit more political because now you have a group that doesn't like how Japan is, and that group is also going through a generational change. So it kind of throws a whole new wrench into that side of things. But the issue is still the same. Rika is going to be killed, as for some reason that's a trump card. I guess it's to gain control or something. I'm not really sure on that. I'm not entirely sure why that has to be done in order to commence the next part of Operation Doomsday or whatever that is. I think we got a little bit more to go through, and well, quite literally, that is what's coming up next. So we'll see how the rest of this explanation goes in the next episode, and hopefully I don't fumble over my goddamn words as much as I have tonight. I did that actually whenever I was recording Saya no Uta, which was literally the previous night. I'm honestly going to say that it's the heat. The heat is bad. It's really bad this year, so that'll be my excuse. But thank you all for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all that fancy shit. I'll see you guys in the next one for more tongue twisters. See you guys then. Take it easy.